Everyone who's here, thank you for coming to this live interview with Sylas Seabrook, a author of 4 different sci-fi novels with a 5th coming, I believe, this May. Sylas, feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself and pimp yourself out.
Hi. So, yes, I do have 4 novels and 3 smaller works that are currently out, most of which are in my original series, Pure Impurity. And that series explores a world where
I'm so sorry.
there are those there are those who have the ability to create life, and everyone else doesn't. And some of the creatures they create want that power, and so we travel through their fights through the books to see it all culminate in a massive battle. The new series is The Rise of Turbinius Cantus, and if you don't mind, I'll just read the blurb for that one for the series. It is Turbinius Cantus, a bipolar 16-year-old born without his limbs, discovers an 1100-year-old secret hidden by the corporation he's destined to control. He's forced to question everything he knows: God or aliens, slavery or freedom, faith or reason. He fights his bipolar ups and downs while setting out on an impossible quest, a quest to unravel the mystery and save humankind. Pursued by police, hunted by corporations, his friends will suffer and his family will be crushed. He will pay an unimaginable price for his beliefs, driven by a deep understanding of loneliness and hopelessness. Giving up will seem to be his only option. But humanity has one hope, a hope that runs deep in Trib, a belief that will push him on, pick him up, and take him to new heights. There's one thing his enemies need to know: you can't stop the Trib. And for those who are tuning in and are not aware of it, the first book in that series will be released on May 15th. And for the next 3 years, the books will be released every 3 months, starting on May 15th, including one on August 15th, which is when we're doing the epic release event. And that is where well over a dozen authors will be releasing their books at the same time on August 15th. So we invite you to stay tuned for those events. You can follow me, and you can see what great wonders are coming up.
Sorry about that. It involved a man in concrete and potentially bad situation.
No problem.
So, breath back.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, I
Well,
kind of missed everything, but I assumed you just pretty much just introduced your books and
yes,
let
I
everyone
introduced the books, the series, gave the blurb, and talked about our August 15th epic release event, where well over a dozen, I lost count, so I don't want to say the number, authors are all going to be releasing on the same day. And May 15th marks the release of the first book in my new series. Though you have read technically the first book, you've read On.
know.
On is actually a side character novella. People who read as beta readers the Aminthian were like, I love On. Give me more On. So I gave them more On. And that has been phenomenally well received.
Y'all heard the man. Make sure you go check him out if you don't know him already. And let's give him and the other authors that'll be releasing on that day the support they deserve. And yes, out of your books, On was the only one I really had time to read.
Mm-hmm.
So that one was so that was more of like a kind of a spin-off novella, really.
It's a side character novella, yeah.
Okay.
It was never intended to be a novel. It doesn't go into a lot of the detail that you would go into in a novel. It develops a character is its purpose. It takes the story of a sweet little 8-year-old boy and turns him into a 15-year-old badass. And you come away going, wow, he's a force to be reckoned with.
And that was definitely the impression I got because it was basically just kind of a walkthrough of his life until he finally kind of got to the point where he wanted to be, that and all the things that he had to deal with were just kind of just seemed like they were just obstacles that were getting in his way that he had to overcome to get where he wanted to be.
They were key moments in time which forged his personality. And does not want anyone to die. Why? Because of what happened with Kay.
Right.
He doesn't want any more ghosts in his life. Um, his speech is messed up because he was stabbed in the spleen and thrown out for the hospital to live or die. Um, he doesn't steal per se because, or not steal, he doesn't get caught because he's thoughtful about how he goes about doing it. And he prefers to find other ways of doing things than harming people. But if he has to, that's
I
on
mean,
them.
yeah, I mean, he does quite a bit of his own fair share of damage throughout the book.
Yeah.
So, um, I just found it had a very philosophical bent to it.
Hmm.
And it was definitely more of a character oriented narrative than having anything to do with like any kind of world like on a grand scheme. It was a very personal story.
Yeah.
Is
And
how it came across.
for a lot of people, they've come back and said more world building would have been cool. Well, welcome to the Aminthian. That's where you get to see it. This was a character building story, and that's what that was all about. And so I focus on the character. You don't see a whole lot of the blue vapor moving around because Ond is too poor for vapor. You don't see a lot of the grandiose things that you'll see in the Aminthian because Ond is too poor for those parts of the world. Um, it could have taken place outside of a couple of incidents anywhere on Earth, and been just as fitting for a story of a kid who grows up like that.
And it did seem to kind of have that narrative of how if a person is born into a certain situation, how because in a lot of ways it seemed like a lot of the choices he was making and in a lot of ways weren't really choices at all. It was either, do something or essentially something bad would happen to him or that he would even die if he didn't do it.
Mhm.
So in so many instances it was like he was presented with choice. It seemed like he was being presented with choices that weren't really choices at all. And I think when you're someone who was born into and grows up in a certain place in this world, you really relate to that because you can reflect on the lack of choices in your own life with the lack of choices he really had in his.
And that's where the speech with Capo comes in. It's my favorite, my second favorite speech of the entire, or section of the entire book. Do you feel like your life is just going on in circles? That you have no choices? That you can't do anything? That your next step is defined for you? I'm giving you a choice. Go back to where you were by your friends, or find hope in the future. And that's where On has to make this choice of does he go back and get beat up, or does he go with this weird guy that seems to want a kid around for some reason? Which was actually really challenging, was not to write Capo as some kind of
Creep.
creepy guy. Um, and that's part of why I gave him a son that he lost. Is that you can now understand and relate more to Capo and where he's coming from is not some weird guy that's collecting little boys, but as a guy who's a mentor and actually cares about people.
Yeah, because even later in the story when And isn't like staying with him anymore, is he could still go to him for help. And I mean, Capo just gave him what he needed and hardly even asked any questions about it. Just gave him what he needed.
Hmm. You find out more as to why Capo behaves the way that he does later on in the books. Some of it may seem undefined, and it is. But when you're talking about a series of 10 books that has an 11th book, which I call the spoiler book, and a side novella, there are questions which are not going to be answered in some of them, most of them. This is to entice you to read further on, to explore this. It's not a standalone type of a book, it is an adventure.
Yeah. And I found that with a lot of books, especially books that the author kind of already knows is going to be a series, is knowing where that line is between giving the readers too much information where they're really not enticed to continue on to the next story and not giving them enough information where they just feel kind of lost in the narrative because they're not really sure, because there isn't enough context being given. I'm not saying that was this book specifically. I've just, in general,
That is a
and I
challenge that
realize it's a fine line to walk.
um I wouldn't say that it's a fine line. I would say it's a matter of, unless you're doing a serial, because a serial is where you've actually just taken a book and chopped it in certain pieces. So it's not going to have the continuity there for one book. But in this is a series. Each book needs to be a well-defined beginning, middle, and end with some point to the book, and then there need to be additional threads that run throughout the entire series. So take for Brandon Sanderson, for example. He's my favorite author. He's got this massive series of books. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
I'm
these books
familiar,
are like,
but
yeah,
they're just massive books.
they're 1,500, 2,000 pages. They're ridiculously long. He has plenty of material that he covers in there, but there's this one guy called Hoyd. You don't know, after reading 4 of his books in this series, which I have done, who Hoyd really is. It's this continuous running thread of who is this person. And so, if somebody were to read book 1 and say, well, Hoyd's storyline is not very well developed, correct. It's not going to be developed because that was not the plot of book 1. So long as the elements of the plot in your series book are covered within the book, you're good. If there are additional threads that are series threads, those can traverse on and go beyond just one book, and they don't get their conclusion in the first book. You have to experience the whole thing to get it. And I think that's why I say it's not so much a fine line, is because you really do need to define the beginning, the middle, and the end in a series for each book, even if you have additional threads which traverse throughout the entire series.
Right, it's just the essentially just the difference between a book arc and a series arc, essentially.
Correct. Yeah,
So,
you need to have both when you're writing a series. In a serial, you don't have that advantage because in a serial, you've got a 200,000 page or 200,000 word book, and you've just taken a knife and cut.
just chopped into pieces.
And so you don't get a beginning, a middle, and an end unless you read the entire serial for it. And for me, I'm kind of like more the person who likes the series style as opposed to having the books chopped up. One example I can think of is Guards, whoever wrote that one. That was a serial. You're going along, the dragons are going to the south, and end of book. It doesn't feel fulfilling to me, you know?
And I've seen that there's quite a few. I've read quite a few, mostly trilogies that where I've read, and I've basically kind of been able to tell like that was what the author did was they probably just wrote something that they realized was way too long, and then they thought they could get away with just chopping it into 3 pieces and selling each piece separately.
Yeah,
It's
and some people do really well. I mean, that Guards that I cited, I can't remember the author. Extremely well known, makes plenty of money. That's how they do it. It's not a fit for me as a reader.
Yeah. Well, it's so much about reading in general is such a subjective from person to person that
Yeah,
as I think I heard a saying once that basically every author has their audience. It's just a matter of finding that audience among the sea of people that is the world population.
yeah.
So,
That's where I've been really lucky with Ond. Quite a few people have read Ond and absolutely love it. And that's become like they became part of my street team. Nisi's in my chat here. Um, she is the coordinator of the street team. JJ, we call him the OG because he's been here since day one and read my books from before this whole series. Um, and I found a lot of promoters from that. People who were passionately interested in where does On go? How does this story with Trib work? What happens with Liv? Those are his side characters. Tribinius is the main character. Um, and they want to see where these characters develop. And Nisi's, she loves audiobooks, so she's in here saying that the audiobook is available for On. Yes, I narrated that.
so I do just kind of want to clarify is so is it that the is it your first trilogy and I'm going to butcher it if I try to pronounce it.
Trib.
Amphitryon
We'll say Trib.
is are they all the same? Um, it's it's all the same universe.
So the Rise of Tribinius Cantus is the series. Ond is part of that world, and so is Jar of Ray's part of that world. That's the two side books. My first series that I wrote, which has four novels and two novelettes, is a completely different series.
Okay, so
Nothing
that's
related whatsoever.
okay, because that was I like I said I only read the synopsis of it or the blurb of it, but it was basically like you have essentially this person who like the entire universe has this like supreme god, and then like somebody from down lower in the celestial hierarchy like absorbs their energy or so. I'm having a brain
No
blank
worries.
right now.
So the premise of the book, and this is a bit of a spoiler, so um, beware. Um, the premise is that there is energy between universes, pure energy. Most energy that we know of has mass to it or some kind of conduit that carries it. But in the space between universe, there's pure energy that exists on all dimensions. And a creature was formed just naturally through existence that was able to manipulate this energy. And that is the energy which actually creates life itself. And they became the curators of life within the existence itself. They created beings that were very much like them, but they didn't have the ability to create life. And they created you and me and everything else that's on our planet, as well as all kinds of planets around in different universes, right? Well, one of their creatures says, it's no fair that you can create life. I want to be able to do it too. And they say, it can't be done. Once we create you, you are what you are. But something happens in book one. Somebody accidentally transitions from being human like to being one of the gods, one of those who can create life itself. And no one knows how it was done. And the other guy goes, hey, see, he did it. If he can do it, why can't I do it? I thought you guys were all these gods and know how to do everything. So give me the power. And we spend four books of them fighting until they come up to a major conclusion. There's the premise of the stories. I have themes for them. Like the theme of book one is we're all gods to something. Be the kind of god you hope you have. The theme of book two is um, the path in life that you take depends upon the choices that you make. The theme of book three is the only necessary and sufficient condition for happiness is belief in oneself. And book four ties all three of those together with a side thing of sometimes in order to protect life, you must take it.
Okay, it seems to almost have kind of a in a very abstract way and almost kind of like Christian mythology vein to it. Like it seems like the first book is kind of a God Lucifer type dynamic almost.
No, there's no like hell and that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, somebody read book one and said, "Oh, you know Mormon beliefs," and I'm like, "No, actually, I don't." I had no idea what they were, so they had to educate me, and apparently, I traversed into some of their beliefs by random happenstance. Um, but it's more like they're just people with powers and enormous bodies.
Okay, and I think that happens a lot, particularly in science fiction and in fantasy, is because the the stories we're raised with, I think, do in a lot of ways tend to reflect in our work because that's just, I mean, a plot is a plot. You can take a plot and rewrite it a million different ways, and that's just, I think in a lot of ways, almost subconsciously, that's kind of how writing works. Is we're essentially just taking one story and just rewriting it in the way that we would like to see it written, almost.
A common analogy is that stories are like people in that they have a similar bone structure. But just like I have a similar bone structure to you, we don't look the same. We're quite different. It's a different story that's being told. So while we have similar structures, it's a different story that's being told, and we get a wide diversity of stories from that.
So I saw on your bio that you published your first one in 2021, I believe, if I read that
I think
correctly.
it was 2022.
Um,
I started writing in 2021 and then published in 2022.
um, Now I don't like to ascribe like everything to COVID, but the timing is the timing coincidental, or is it just you, like everyone else, was just stuck at home, so we all just started writing books because we had nothing else to do?
No, quite the contrary. I was no longer stuck at home. I had to go into the office when COVID hit, and because of how it was, because of legal requirements, you had to actually be in the office. And the reason I was at that job is because at my previous job, I was the tech guy in charge of everything, which meant if I wanted to take a day off, an hour off, they needed to know where I was. I had to be available. There was no freedom in my life to do what I wanted. And I value my creativity over how much money I'm making. So I quit a decently paying job and took a not very decently paying job. But it paid me in time, and I got my time back. And then I was able to write my story. And I told them at the time, I'm not taking a promotion. You're going to offer it to me because I do a good job? No, I don't want it because that means you're going to interfere with my free time and my writing, and I am going to write these books. And here we are a couple of years later, and I've written the books.
Okay, so you just went the full, I'm throwing all my feet in this. I'm gonna do just what I need to do to survive, and I'm putting all my energy into this. And now it's 3 years later, and you have 6 books out.
Um,
If I'm doing that, if I'm
Four
doing
novels and three smaller works, so seven total.
so. So you managed to get a lot accomplished in just a few years, even more than a lot of full-time professional authors, or
Yeah,
not
I've
professional
got
authors.
four more books that are written. I'm just releasing them in staggered periods, and
Yeah.
while I work on the other books as well.
Which
So
marketing wise is smart. You don't want to release everything at once. Then you
yeah,
just
and I
write.
don't want to wait another 2 years to have all 10 books written, well, all 11 books written. I threw in this extra one because I started by deciding I would write 3 books at once for this new series. So I wrote the 3 books, just writing one back to back to back. And then that meant I had 3 books to edit. And I hate editing. And so I got editing and editing and editing. And I wanted to be creative again after months of editing. So I started another book I call the spoiler book. And I'm having a great time writing that. But it's the character that gives you all the spoilers for it. The opening lines of it are, and the book is called Jar of Rays. There's spoilers. Jar of Rays knew them all. If anyone knew his story, they'd know where it all began and where it all ends. And then it goes into him running across an area to get somewhere. But that's the spoiler book. So that's been a real fun thing to write, and I get to tease the readers quite a bit in writing it. But that's a secondary one that goes after the 10th book, because if you read it, you will know all the spoilers for the series.
So that's kind of your fun manuscript. That when you just want to have fun with it, and you really don't care about anybody else. It's just okay. I'm gonna go work on this where I can just have fun with it.
Yeah, when I want to get back into creativity and I'm like not ready to go on to the next novel in the series, but I need some time to do something creative, I go into Jar of Vase.
Okay, that's actually a good piece of advice. I should do that myself. Um,
What was that?
Apparently you're so good at editing though.
Oh, I am known for being comprehensive. I warn people when they say, "Can you edit my stuff?" I'm like, so you do realize that no matter how good you are, there's probably going to be a few hundred messages from me about how to adjust things and stuff. I'm really detailed. I don't want to hurt your feelings. So if you don't want to look at that kind of stuff, just tell me now.
I've had to do that a couple of times. It's like I'll read and I'll critique your book, but you better want an honest answer because
Yeah. And Christy's
I
over
mean
here
I'll be
being
nice about it,
comprehensive.
but I will be critical. But yeah, but I think overall editing is almost like almost the worst part of writing because it's where with editing it's like, especially when you're editing your own work, is that's where you have to be willing to look at your work through more of an impartial lens where it's you have to be critical not only of the work but also in some ways of yourself. And I think a lot of people don't like having that almost reverse lens where they really have to look at themselves and really be able to critique themselves. I also think it kind of discourages some authors in a way because they don't like the idea that what they've done isn't necessarily bad but isn't as good as they think it is when they go back and take a second look at it.
Yeah, and I would say that that's an unconstructive viewpoint. The viewpoint is, when an artist is making a statue out of a block of clay or something, they do the rough edges, cut it out, give a general idea to the shape. Then they go in with a fine tooth like blade and they chip away at it to refine it and get it perfect. You're starting with your first draft with that rough cutting out of the hewing of the block, and then you're going through in your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th drafts, and and that's how many it takes. And you're refining it to smooth out the edges, take off the curves, and really unveil the beauty behind what you created at first.
Right. And I think that's really the better way to look at it. That I think more authors and aspiring authors really need to hear that like just because the first thing you did isn't perfect doesn't mean that you won't eventually get there.
My third book in this new series, when I looked at the draft, I was like, this is unmitigated crap. It's like telling and bad choice of words, and I was only able to save about 10% of that draft. But what came out of it was a fantastic book. Its premise now is where there is hope, there is life, and it's beautifully told. But it's taken another 6 rounds of edits to get to that stage. But the first draft, I offended myself.
But
And what was my favorite part of writing the book? So JJ asked me this question earlier, and Nisi's asking it again, but um, they mean this in the writing process. What is my favorite part? And my favorite part is I say that what I'm doing is I'm painting on the canvas of another person's imagination when I write. And so when they come back to me and they're like, I can't believe you did this, and oh, that was so cool, and what about this, and how does that work? And they have that passion. That means that my painting came through. And so I appreciate that, and that's the most exciting aspect of it. Some of my most fun scenes to write were when Jar of Reyes goes on his first date with his future wife. He has the god vapor, and he's able to create an entire beach scene that's just amazing over a field and have her walk out onto it. And I've got birds with different colored plumes and all kinds of stuff going on, and the birds are singing to a melody that they can dance to. It was magical. I love that.
I was gonna say that is a charmer. So, um, so yeah, you wanted to go ahead and read off part of your upcoming book. Feel free to go ahead.
Sure. Where we are at is Trib wants to get the Aminthian. The name of each of the book is the medallion that they're trying to go for, and he gets it. But that hasn't solved all the questions. So he's talking with Yesvari Plurvald, who was the guy who was planted with it. And this is where Yesvari picks up. First, I cannot answer the question of what happened with the medallion to you. There are powers in this world you do not understand, and it is your father's job to explain those to you. I suggest you talk to him. Second, we thought of catching the thief as well. Pamela, will you do the honors? Yes, husband, his wife said, standing and grabbing an Adore from the table. It wasn't one Trib had seen before, but there were so many that his lack of familiarity didn't mean much. This one was an owl with extra eyes. She poured some yellow vapor directly into the doorway from her fingertips, and the little owl came to life, its eyes lighting up and broadcasting a hologram into the room. I didn't know Adoris could do that, Trib said. There are many things you don't know, son, Yesvari said. This is the security footage of the night your medallion was deposited here. They took great pains to leave no tracks and knew my security protocols. Follow it backwards, Liv said. At some point, they put on those disguises. Yesvari nodded, and Pamela reversed the playback. The footage glitched as it switched from camera to camera until it got to a Messon's car's doors opening. The perpetrator got out of the car, cloaked. They followed footage from city cameras as the car drove backward through the city, stopping at a traveler's timing much like Trib's. The car's doors opened, but no one came out. The doors closed, and the TT's door opened, then shut a few seconds later. Trib looked at Yesvari. What does that mean? You do need a lot spelled out for you, don't you? They cloaked their movements with Berminium. The house was rented under a false name, and the payment was untraceable. So we've got nothing, Liv said. You have the Aminthian, Liv, love. Isn't that what you really want? Pamela said. So there we go.
Okay, well, everybody heard him. Go pre-order the book. So, so I guess we're going to go ahead. We're coming up to the 40-minute mark. So let me go ahead. I'm going to give you a chance to do an outro.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I appreciate your time and everything. For everyone who has come, especially the street team, my awesome fans, thank you for taking time out of your days to come up here. I know some of you are working, so that extra effort is really appreciated. The Aminthian, as it shows up here, comes out May 15th. You can go to sylas.art and pre-order it now. And that is the first book in a 10-book series. The second book comes out on August 15th, when we'll be doing the epic release event, where over a dozen different authors will be releasing their books all on the same day. You can go to epicreleaseevents.com and find out more information about that.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the interview today. Like he said, make sure you all go check out his website, pre-order his book, and I believe that's pretty much everything. So, Sylas, it was wonderful to have you. Everybody have a good day, and like I said, Sylas, it was great to have you on, and maybe in a few years I'll have you on, we'll, do this again.
Okay, sounds good.